Okay, so as you know, we are still in the midst of the college completion agenda era in post-secondary education. Here you see the post-secondary attainment rate in 2023. Back in 2009, our goal was to have a 60% post-secondary attainment rate among working adults in the United States, that is age 25 to 64. You can see for the most part as a state, we will not reach that goal. And that post-secondary attainment rate is considered a short-term credential or higher as a marker for attainment. In the United States, we're about 54% overall, so we will fall short of the goal next year. But we continue to kind of reach towards that goal, particularly thinking about ways that we can amplify this rate across racialized and gendered context and identities. In Illinois, we're a little bit ahead of the curve at 50, almost 57%. The national average, but still falling short of that 60%. So that's the good news. The not so good news is that our above average attainment rate is really carried by 4 counties. And those of you familiar in Illinois know these counties, DuPage and Lake, which are suburbs of Chicago, McLean, which is the county where Illinois State is located, and Champaign, which is the county where we at the University of Illinois Urbana-Champaign are located. The remaining counties, including the largest, Cook County, have attainment rates below both state and national averages. So there's certainly work to be done. Excuse me. We also know that there are 7 counties with more than 100,000 working adults and less than a 50% post-secondary attainment rate. Excuse me. And you can see those counties there. And again, if you know anything about Illinois, you know that many of these counties have concentrated what we call either micropolitan or micro-urban areas with a high critical mass of populations of students of or people of color and communities of color in those areas. And then finally, the thing that we're most focused on today is addressing that racialized inequalities. So we know, again, overall, our attainment rate in Illinois is 57%, but among our Black African-American population, it's just over a third have an attainment rate, and just over a quarter of our Latinx slash Hispanic population have a post-secondary attainment rate, so far below the average overall. And we will note that the Latinx population at 1.13 is the fastest growing population in our state. So again, the fastest growing population in our state has the lowest post-secondary attainment rate that has significant consequences, not just for education, but for social welfare, for community development, and for individual mobility. So last year, we know that the Supreme Court, in terms of racialized equity, made it a little bit harder for us to pursue these goals by deciding that the use of race-conscious admissions at both the University of North Carolina and Harvard University were unconstitutional and violated the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. Now, it should be noted that the opinion did focus on admissions decisions and said little or nothing about other wide-ranging practices and policies related to race neutral or colorblind practices that can increase diversity. But admissions is a gatekeeping process, and so this decision did have will have some consequences on the ways in which the diversity of student bodies across institutions that have or programs that have admissions policies. And the court did ruled that admissions officers can consider aspects of personal experience with race and racism, but not necessarily the identity of race solely. Now, the question is, how does this affect community colleges? Well, first, we know that both in California and Texas that had previous bans. So in California, Proposition 209, which we'll talk about here a little bit, as well as in Texas, in 1996, the Hopwood decision banned race-conscious admissions in both California and Texas. And as a result, we saw a correlation with widening enrollment disparities at four-year institutions among Black and African American, as well as Hispanic Latinx students. We also, research also shows that over the 20 years since 1996, when both these bans were put into effect, that there was a chilling effect on Black and African American, as well as Hispanic and Latino students and their pursuit of admissions at four-year institutions, resulting in fewer applications with these students at the flagship institution. And then what happens is that as the acceptance rates decrease and there's a chilling effect, then the students who historically might have applied and been accepted to the public four-year institution are now more concentrated in more accessible post-secondary institutions, including institutions with open admissions like community colleges. And in fact, in California, Bleemer, who's an economist, found that with post Proposition 209, there was essentially a domino effect. So students who typically applied and enrolled at the UC system are now shifting their enrollment to the California state system, which has a little bit less admissions standards, more open access in their admissions, and also more regionally located and close to communities of color. And then that created a domino shift where a lot of students were crowded out of the California state system and then going to the community college, where again, you had another domino effect where a portion of Black and Latinx students were basically enrolled out of post-secondary altogether because of the domino effect and the shift in terms of proportion of students, especially Black and Latinx students, going to the California state system and then the community college system, and then crowding out students altogether. And as a result, Black and Latinx students were actually less likely to earn a post-secondary degree after Prop 209 than they were before Proposition 209 was introduced in 1996. So this is why community colleges, although not directly affected by the Supreme Court decision, there is an indirect effect that we will see a number higher. We potentially will see a higher number of Black and Latinx students at the community college, even more so than we do now, but without necessarily the added resources. So institutions may continue to stay under-resourced while being asked to contribute to equity issues or equity in higher education. And there we see a couple of quotes from our colleagues who emphasize this and the need for community colleges to kind of maintain their stance in equity, while also having the challenge of doing that with either the same funding level or perhaps less funding level, depending on the institution. Now, in Illinois, we're a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of where we are with House Bill 5464, which created the equity plans. Many of you know that your institution, you may have been directly involved in the creation of the equity plan, but this is state legislation that is directly related to addressing access, retention, and completion for populations who are traditionally underrepresented. And there's a definition in there that it also includes students who are from racialized minority populations. And public institutions are required to define that population and then provide measures of how they're going to take a holistic approach to situating equity around these students as a way of amplifying diversity and inclusion. So while we're a little bit ahead of the curve in terms of at least some legislation that will help us mitigate the potential effects of the Supreme Court decision, we still have to maintain a proactive stance in terms of addressing these issues. And I think one of the more important things is to look at states who have already gone through this challenge and seeing ways in which they met those head on, as well as some of the lingering consequences that they haven't been able to adjust to. And so we specifically want to look at California because the demographics of the state are similar to Illinois, particularly as Illinois increases its Latinx population across the state, and not just in Chicago, but in other areas across the state, as well as the historic migration patterns among our Black population who are situated across the state, and not just in Chicago, but in areas that that were part of the Northern migration in the turn of the 20th century. So with that, we thought we would bring in one of our colleagues and noted experts, Dr. Marissa Vasquez, who is a faculty member at San Diego State University and has been a longtime advocate for increasing equity and social justice in educational contexts. She is, sorry, disappeared there. I was going to grab my book. She's the author, also co-author, which I'll get my book here in a second, but I don't want to disappear. There it is. There you go. Marissa's good at promotion. So we'll talk a little bit about her book in terms of how it relates to the work that we are doing and want to do. And really for us, it's an opportunity to have a conversation with a groundbreaking scholar, a scholar practitioner who has been on the forefront of this battle for a long time in California, and provide us with some insights on what she's learned both as from practice, from observation of practice, as well as from research and scholarship in this area. So without further ado, I'll turn it over to Dr. Vasquez, and again, thank her for her time and her colleagues' time in California as we move forward with this afternoon, and really hoping this is just the beginning of a collaborative relationship between the state of Illinois and the state of California. So thank you.
Thank you for that very kind introduction. Can you see? I don't know. I tried sharing my screen. Can you see my screen? Like the presentation? Or no? Like here? Oh, can you hear me? No, let me see.
Yes.
Yeah, we can see it, but it's you might have to because you're sharing your whole desktop, so maybe in presenter form, switch
Cool.
it, and then you can share it.
All right. Y'all can see this?
No,
You can't. Yeah, okay. I'm gonna need some vocal participation because I can't see people's faces from the screen mode. So cool.
If you want to send it to me, Marissa, as you get started, then I can share it and
I'm
move
okay. Just
forward.
let me.
Okay, you're good. Okay.
Yeah, we're good. I was like, just let me know if there's any questions that I'm not able to see. But so can you see me in the screen too, or no?
We can see you. We cannot see your slides, or at least I can't see your slides.
Oh, pues okay. Let me just sorry, y'all, technical difficulties. Let me send you my slides then, and I can do this. Well, thank you for having me. I'll stop and say that first. It's been a fun morning. I just wrapped up a presentation to our incoming transfer students who are part of Transfer Bridge. So it's part of like our EOP program here at SDSU, San Diego State University. Dr. Baber, I'm putting this in the chat. I'll send you a direct message with the link. So yeah, so this is really cool because I feel like it's a very timely conversation. You know, I think going from the context of like speaking with students and about research and talking to them about, you know, this idea of imposter syndrome, and talking to them about how, you know, this idea, this concept of being an imposter is really, you know, it's from 1978 and it's grounded around, you know, focus on women, particularly white women in the Midwest. And so it doesn't necessarily account for, you know, structural racism and COVID and transfer students and all of that. So kind of recontextualizing this idea of like this imposter syndrome to being something that is imposed on us, rather than, you know, something that's internally kind of formed. So, okay, yay, you got it. This I can see. Okay, well, I guess I'll let you know when to advance the slide. So first off, again, just thank you, Marissa Vasquez. I'm an associate professor at San Diego State University. I teach in our College of Education. So we have a master's program in post-secondary educational leadership and student affairs. And I also teach in our doctoral program for community college leadership. I'm also, do work with the Community College Equity Assessment Lab, or what we call SEAL. And, I'll talk a little bit about the work that we do some shameless plugs for our work. So I'll start off by telling you a little bit about me. So these pictures, represent, like, talk about like who I am, what I do, and how I do it. So in terms of who I am, I'm born and raised here in San Diego along the US-Mexico border. I have a really big family, so I'm definitely someone who's family oriented. I love my family, and I'm usually the person that my family comes to for anything college related. Of course, I'm the go-to, like Mija, for financial aid. I'm like, I don't know, financial aid is changing so much. I don't even know what to tell you anymore. So my family is really important to me. And, a lot of the experiences that I had within my own educational journey as a community college student and as a transfer student, to a Research One institution really impacted the work that I do, and the reason why I focus so much on equity within community college spaces, and for students in particular as they transition through community college in their first year, and even on and at the four university. And so as Dr. Baber mentioned, in terms of what I do, my research has focused on, work related to community colleges. The work that I do with SEAL is focused more on like assessment of institutional outcomes and kind of like climate. That's a picture of us. I think Dr. Baber and I, we went to, was it Nova? Or then it was Virginia. It was for the White House. They had to raise the bar, and of course, the millennial in me wanted to run up on stage. I'm like, take a picture of me. And then, so how I do it, right? I'm surrounded by an amazing group of students and team members and colleagues who make this work not just fun but also meaningful. I think it's really important to bring folks onto I don't know, just, on this journey of advocacy for community college work. Okay, so let's see, next slide. Oh, this is my shameless plug. Okay, so part of my work with SEAL is we've gotten some funding from the Lumina Foundation to bring back a consortium. So a lot of our work is focused on college men of color and supporting college men of color, which we realize that because of these anti-DEI laws that have been occurring in several of our states across the country, have made it very difficult for our colleagues to be able to do this work. So even before this legislation had started passing, the Lumina Foundation was granted us some funding to basically put together what we're calling a national consortium on college men of color, to host, trainings and like information sharing sessions, very similar to this work here with OCCRL, and but with a focus on, improving outcomes for college men of color. So we're inviting colleges to join us, and, as part of this consortium, we will host monthly webinars. We're also hosting a working group meeting here in San Diego in October. And so the colleges who are able to join us or will be joining us, we're asking folks to send, a team over to San Diego with us and kind of spend 2 days just learning about what is the landscape looking like right now across the country for, this work on college men of color, specifically in community colleges. Okay, next slide. Shameless plug number 2, the book that Dr. Lorenzo Baber also shared with us. So my colleague and I co-edited this book. It's Community College and Beyond, Understanding the Transfer Pipeline for Latina, Latino, Latinx Students. And so you are interested in purchasing this, we were able to get a 30% discount. So you use that code right there, and it's good until November 30th. But what I'll say is, this book, really the impetus for it was just, as was mentioned previously, right? Like the increasing number and percentage of Latinx students that have, continuously enrolled in our community colleges, but, whose success outcomes are not, on par with enrollment. And so, we sought to, we did some homework, and we're like, okay, we know we have, a lot of really great, amazing scholars and friends who are doing research, but everyone's kind of doing it in these different spaces. And so we're like, why don't we, it'd be amazing to bring together a group of scholars to come and, kind of do like this anthology of their work in this book that, focuses on the experiences of students while they're at the community college, and then upon their transfer. And then we have a section in the book that focuses on our research from scholar practitioners who also share, what are some of their practices that they've been employing, both at the 2-year at their community college institutions and at their 4-year or baccalaureate degree granting institutions. And so what I'll say generally about, the collectivity of, what these chapters are telling us, and specifically in focusing on Latinx students and their transfer trajectory, is that, faculty, staff, counselors play a critical role in student success outcomes, whether it's helping students with fostering navigational and social capital in their journey, fostering belonging and community for these students. Many of them who are, also first-generation college students, students whose English language is not, or whose native language is not English, and maybe they're coming in to do, work within our CTE programs. This work also, this book and the research here also reminds us that racial microaggressions are still very real experiences that our students are having, not just at the community colleges, but even more so prominently at, their at the 4-year universities once they have transferred to their institution. So, we've got some chapters in here that are really focused on, what should we as institutions and institutional leaders do to help, mitigate some of these experiences that our students are having. Some of our colleagues also wrote about, different pedagogical practices that have been successful, or that have been really helpful in supporting students, in the classroom and out of the classroom. I'll say this work also, emphasizes that, Latinx students represent an array of intersecting identities and experiences. There's a lot of calls, both in this book and I think just in our policies around, these calls to disaggregate data and to explore like the broader sense of Latinidad within the community, recognizing that, Latinx students are not, a monolith population on our campuses, but really emphasizing the importance of, understanding students' experiences within these differential contexts. And then I think the last kind of big takeaway is that, this idea of transitional support is important for students, whether it's through, programs, or, specific people, right? So like many of the students or the research whose focus on student experiences, many times students could name, specific people. And so that always reminds me of, I don't know it perfectly, but this like Maya Angelou quote where it's like, people won't always remember what you did or what you said, but they'll always remember how you made them feel. And so I always, think about that in my work with students and just in general, that, and I think about, what's the type of support that students need as they're transitioning into college, even in the community college, and then even through, navigating the transfer experience. And I think also keeping in mind spaces and how, physical spaces on campus have also play a part in how students are navigating our campuses. So, yeah, again, shameless plug, pick up the book. Yeah, let's see, next slide. Okay, so I want to start off with just a little history lesson, I guess, on California community colleges. So, community colleges in California have had a long history. I know that the first community college was here in Illinois, with Joliet Community College. And so the first campus, starting in 1907, with the upward extension law, this allowed high school districts to expand their scope to offering the first 2 years of college here in California. 3 years later, in 1910, Fresno City College became the first community college in the state. And since then, there was just, it came forth a lot, a plethora of community colleges throughout California. And this was supported by various legislative and funding efforts, such as the District Junior College Law, the GI Bill, the 1960 California Master Plan for Higher Education, which established the community colleges as a means of open access public higher education to all California residents who were high school graduates. And then in 1967, Senate Bill 669 formally established the California Community College system. And today, the system, is I think the largest in the nation with 116 colleges, 73 districts. This number is always kind of fluctuating, but usually around like 1.8 million students. And being that we're in California, the majority of our students represent diverse ethnic backgrounds. And so I think, while the mission of California's community colleges has been, to function as an open, public open access institutions of higher education that serve communities and students all over California. Our research, not just in California, but I'm sure in other states, right, have found that, this open access is not guaranteed that students will be successful in completing their educational credentials or achieving the goals that they've set out for themselves. So I wanted to, maybe go to the next slide. So because of these, changes over time, we've seen like our higher education agendas evolve, over different things, right? Like if you've been around, I don't know what it was before Access, maybe it was something else, but I know for at least in my experience in my time in higher education, I remember coming in and hearing a lot about like the Access agenda, right? Like how are we focusing on improving access to higher education? And then that turned into the completion agenda, right? Okay, it's our students are here now. Now, how are we, what are we doing to make sure that they're completing, and persistence from course to course, year to year. And then eventually that turned into the graduation agenda. It was like, okay, they're cool completing. Now, how do we get them to graduate on time, or in timely, timelines, graduation in terms of, transfer and earning baccalaureate degrees. And then I think what we've been seeing, especially over the last, like maybe 10 years or so, is this, call for equity and really focusing on this equity agenda in higher education overall and in community colleges. Next slide. So, what I want to kind of work backwards, because this whole focus on equity and, these calls for legislation, they're not new. California, we love our initiatives. We love our, what is it? All these different, our assembly bills and our Senate bills and all these good things. So I wanted to start off, by just kind of giving us an overview of the different, like these various like reform efforts and like key legislation that has occurred within the last, I don't know, many years, to kind of get us to where we are today. And so, student equity is not a new concept, even though it's gained more momentum more recently because funding was thrown behind these efforts. But in 1992, the California Community College Board of Governors adopted a student equity policy for the system, and in 1993 integrated a requirement for college districts to create student equity plans, which would have actions related to working to mitigate disproportionate impact for different student groups. And as I had shared earlier, right, however, without funding and accountability measures, this policy, really went untapped. And there wasn't, like I said, a lot of accountability for actually producing these student equity plans. And so fast forward to 2008, in response to concerns about the academic, preparedness or lack of preparedness levels of new students who were entering California community colleges, especially in terms of like English and math skills. We started to see the California Basic Skills Initiative was developed, so it was referred to as BSI. This work was centered on providing developmental, or as we know, remedial math and education instruction. And this also included English as a second language instruction for reading and composition as a means to preparing students to take and succeed in transfer level math and English. In 2010, in response to the low completion rates, the California legislature directed the California Community College Board of Governors to engage in a process to internally examine barriers for students within the system. And so this eventually led to the creation of what came to be known as the Student Success Task Force in 2011. And so this task force was tasked to, like I said, kind of look at these barriers and success outcomes for students across the system. And in the end, they created a report, and the report had 22 recommendations for the state. And so this included the need for additional legislative policy changes. In 2012, legislators passed SB 1456, which we tend to call it triple SP, SSP. So 1456, SB 1456 addressed 4 of the task force recommendations, including changes to community college onboarding procedures and guidance services. So really this was, our matriculation piece of legislation. And so the triple SP stands for Student Success and Support Program. And the idea was that, colleges were tasked with, for every student that comes in, there needed to be students need to have an academic plan in order to move forward as part of the matriculation process. And so 2014, there's a reason why I'm going through all of this. So 2014, it was SB 860. And so this extended funding to colleges to address equity gaps for their students. And so this work further expanded equity desegregation and supports for foster youth, veterans, low-income students. So similar to the triple SP, funds, like these student equity funds were used. Some were being used to provide like direct aid to students, but a lot of it was also used to hire personnel and upscale systems and services. And so, you have these 3 legislations or legislative pieces, in 2008, 2012, and 2014 that are really trying to get to like the heart of this, these equity challenges or issues that our state was facing around, so making sure that students were prepared for transfer level English and math. Again, making sure that students were being onboarded through matriculation, and then student equity, which was really, trying to, reduce the equity gaps that were happening for student populations. And in 2016, we had Eloy Ortiz Oakley, who became the first Latino to hold the position of chancellor. And so when he was in this role, right, he kind of took the lead on a series of ambitious reforms, aimed at more holistically addressing systemic issues faced by community colleges and their students across the state. And so, with there was a team of folks that kind of came together and developed this, really was called the Vision for Success, right? And this Vision for Success really outlined, the need to address these different challenges that were occurring in the state. And some of these things were probably things that we're all experiencing as well, even in Illinois, was that, most community college students never reached a defined end goal, right? The system at the time had less than 50% college completion rates. Students who did reach their goals took a long time to do so. So the average time frame was found to be about 5.2 years. Older and working adults were often left behind, with more than 40% of students being 25 years of age or older. Community colleges were more expensive than they appeared, right? And so there were all these different disparities that were occurring. And so in 2018, the Chancellor's Office moved to integrate the funding for this triple SP, Basic Skills Initiative, and Student Equity into one. And it came came to be known as the Student Equity and Achievement Program, SEAP. California and our acronyms. And so with this at the same time, right, we also started to see a shift in our student-centered funding formula, which really, put emphasis on performance-based funding, for colleges. And then AB 705 also sought to kind of tackle the number of remedial courses that students needed to take in order to reach transfer level English and math. And so now in California, students are not, can basically self-place themselves into their own English and math courses without, needing to kind of take certain prerequisite courses beforehand. So let's go to the next slide. So all of these things matter. So I think because, history, right, if we're looking at the history of legislation in California and where we are now in terms of like equity and this kind of the expectation that campuses deliver, student equity plans and design this, I will say that, this idea of race was always like the pink elephant in the room in these conversations, right? If you're looking at all of these other legislative pieces, I think that race and racial equity was, it might have been in the spirit of a lot of these legislative pieces, but, without the funding, like I was saying earlier, right, like student equity, the policy existed in 1993 is what I said. But really, we didn't see much of a, there wasn't much effort moving forward towards, like really holding our institutions accountable to producing these plans until funding was actually attached to it. And with funding attached to it, and I think in combination with, having leaders across the state really kind of focusing on the need to reduce equity gaps amongst, racially minoritized populations, I think, and in addition, going hand in hand with, I think, a lot of work and efforts being done by colleagues at various research centers that were helping practitioners kind of develop the tools and the resources on how to really get to focusing their student equity plans, but using a, very race-centered lens rather than a race-neutral lens. Okay, so let's see, next slide. So Dr. Baber mentioned, Proposition 209 in California. So Prop 209 was passed in 1996. And so, Prop 209 prohibited our University of California system and other state entities from using race, ethnicity, or sex as criteria in public employment, public contracting, and public education. Next slide. And so similar to what Dr. Baber shared in terms of like what were some of these broader outcomes of Prop 209, there was a big emphasis on UC Berkeley, given that it was probably one of the more competitive UC campuses to get into, and also where we saw the broader disparities of, the racial gaps beginning to strategies, I can't think of the word. You know what I mean? Okay, if I do this, hopefully y'all know what I mean. Anyways, so just some data points, right? At UC Berkeley between 1995 and 1997, approximately 52% of racially minoritized students who applied for admission as freshmen were accepted. And then, with Prop 209, these scholars suggest that, this number fell just between 25% between 1998 and 2000. And so this article was really around that chilling effect, or like this warming effect that was happening as a result of 209, I think Dr. Baber was referring to earlier. And so in addition to like the number of, students that were not on campus, there was this concern that there would be less students actually applying to these four-year institutions because of this perception that, that students would become isolated on the campus, that there would be an absence of peer groups and an absence of like this critical mass of racially minoritized students, leading to hostile racial campus climates and a lack of representation. In addition to that, right, you also had this like signaling value of, that a degree from Berkeley, right? If you were me, right, if you were Mexican American, and you're like, oh yeah, I got a degree from Berkeley or whatever, there was always kind of this stigma associated with it. It's like, yeah, but you just got in because of, like affirmative action. And so there was like this, suspicion of racial preference in admissions became I don't know, it was something that was in the air, right? And so I can tell you, I went to UC Berkeley for my undergrad degree, and when I was there in 2003, the Latino population was 9%. And I don't think that percentage has increased very much since then. I think maybe it's maybe like 11 or 12% now. So all of these, notes that somebody published in 2013, right? Like these scholars published 2013. I can say these were, for me personally, very real applications of what this looked like at Cal. In terms of the isolation, right? This fear of moving away from home and my community that is predominantly, Latino, feeling like I was the only, not feeling, but really sometimes up in my upper division courses, really being the only, Mexican American woman in my classes, and kind of feeling like all eyes were on me, right? Like that everything I said represented my entire, I don't know, race, ethnicity. And so it made it very uncomfortable being there. Okay, next slide. So, and kind of shifting and transitioning and thinking about, the more recent legislative, the Supreme Court ruling in 2023, we have to remember that these like challenges, these higher ed legal challenges are not new, right? We've seen multiple cases over the years where the use of considering race and admissions practices being challenged. For those who may recall, in 2013 and 2016, we saw the case of Fisher versus UT in terms of the use of race as a consideration for admissions process. In 2003, we saw two cases over at the University of Michigan in terms of using race in their admissions process, both at the university and specifically within their law school. And then in 1978, and before that, there was the case from the University of California and Bucky, which ruled that while strict racial quotas are impermissible in the university admissions context, race could be used as one factor in the admission decision-making process in order to enhance diversity, right? And so we're moving from 1978 now to 2023, 2024, where this is, we are no longer able to use these factors for our admission processes. Next slide. Okay, so you recall, right, this when the judgment had been made on this most recent affirmative action ruling, our colleague, Dr. Sean Harper, had written a piece in Forbes that asked this question, and he kind of listed out his predictions of what would happen across, different states and college campuses. So it said, what will happen on college campuses as a result of the SCOTUS ruling on affirmative action? And so based on trends and outcomes across the 10 states that previously had passed affirmative action bans, he offered some predictions of what would occur after, last year's Supreme Court ruling. So next slide. So I didn't include all of them, but these were some, right? And so in thinking about, his predictions from June of 2023, I want us to stop and kind of like think, like what have we actually seen come to fruition? So in one of his predictions, he suggested that the number of faculty and administrators of color would decline. And so that affirmative action admissions will extend to employment practices. And so this idea that, affirmative action is not just, isolated to admissions practices, but also to, the way that our institutions are able to support, equity work. And so I think we have seen this, in various states where colleagues, departments have just been completely just, they don't exist anymore, right? Even when we were trying to be strategic by, changing the names of some departments or some of our programming, Unfortunately, right, these spaces are, got a little bit more hostile, and now, we don't see these spaces anymore. And so it did definitely have an impact on not just the students and their admission, but also faculty and administrators and staff. The next prediction was that people of color keep going, will be further marginalized at predominantly white institutions. And so he predicted that would be a continued tokenization due to lower enrollments. Another point he'd made was that white students will learn too little and enter professions less prepared to engage meaningfully with diverse racial peers. And then lastly, well, not lastly from his overall predictions, but of what I have here on the slide, is that there would be an interpretive overreach that would lead to decreases in race-focused campus initiatives due to and that the SCOTUS ruling would be misused as an excuse to abandon race-conscious activities. And so this was really important as we think about our work within student equity planning, which I am aware that is something that community colleges are being tasked to do or invited to do here in Illinois. So next slide. So as we're thinking about this, and we're pausing to kind of think like, so what do colleges need to consider in their next iteration of strategic or equity or master planning? How do we work strategically to avoid race-neutral equity policies and practices? Next slide. And so one of the things, right, is to kind of be aware of, these different people, policies, cultures, structures, external pressures that could potentially derail equity efforts, right? And really taking some time to reflect on, what are some campus policies that are making it difficult, if not impossible, to implement equity actions? What are embedded ways of knowing at our institutions that could inhibit equity goals, right? So what does the culture look like at our campuses? And then, thinking about structures and external pressures. Can y'all remind me how much time I have? Am I over time? Okay.
It's all right. We started a little bit late. So how about 5 more minutes?
Okay, perfect. All right, next slide. So I wanna kind of just give you some examples of important policy work and some references that might be helpful. So in this paper, actually, Dr. Baber is one of the authors in this paper. And it really, kind of starting from a broader lens perspective of what is it called? Like systemically, right? And understanding how community colleges are systemically resourced and structured in ways that reproduce white supremacy as both process and outcome, and looking at our colleges through this lens of racialized organizations. And so I think this is a really good resource to kind of begin as you're working in your teams, with your teams on developing student equity plans. Take a pause, right, and kind of ask those other questions to yourselves, like how is equity and how is race being distributed within our institution or organization? Next slide. I also want to draw on some work from our colleagues over at University of Southern California, USC. So in 2018, right, as we'd mentioned, right, the California, our Chancellor's Office established that SCAP program, which kind of merged those three fundings, and is what kind of prompted the mandate, I guess, for community colleges in California to develop their initial equity plans. And so this work that was conducted by our colleagues, really took some time to examine 113. Remember, we have 116 community college campuses. So they did a lot of work examining 113 student equity plans to really understand how well the plans served as tools of equity. And so when they did the scan of the equity plans, they found that only 1% of equity plan activities were dedicated to the creation or delivery of culturally responsive pedagogy. Only 3% of the equity plans included capacity building and professional development that focused on equity. 94% avoided deficit-minded language. And 87% of these activity descriptions did not mention race or were race specific. And so again, right, the student equity plans, kind of, as you saw, right, the timeline of legislation. So a lot of these campuses and maybe this is similar in Illinois, right? Where it's like you get this mandate, it's like, okay, create these equity plans, and without the proper framing as to around and like the proper questions to ask around what do we even look for, right? Like what types of activities do we even design with equity in mind? Making sure that we're all on the same page about what equity means at this campus is really important. And I also want to just kind of highlight that this work has been continuously evolved from one of my colleagues here at SDSU, Dr. Eric Felix, who's been facilitating the Student Equity Planning Institute through his research collective, the Racialized Research Collective. So if you want to get some more information, Google him. Next slide. And so I will say what I really appreciated about their work also is that there's so many tools that they used. I know that this is a little blurry, but one of the things I think is really helpful, and I have my students, our students in our doctoral program, we have a class on strategic planning, is, do a scan of your plans, right? And look to see how many times does, do these plans utilize equity-minded language, or are they using deficit-minded language, or is it using kind of this like race-neutral language, right? I think this is a really cool place to begin. It's like, okay, what's the starting point? If you go to the next slide. And so I took a look at your equity planning framework and kind of just saw, what's being required of folks to respond to. And I guess some of the questions that came to mind for me was, what metrics are being used to define and achieve equity, right? I think the initial part, is kind of definitely looking at your data, identifying, where are some gaps in, completion, persistence, graduation. But as you're looking at the data and you're assessing these equity gaps, I want to, encourage you all to think about, what demographic data isn't being captured or is not being asked to be captured, right? So who are our populations that are not here, right? I think I noticed that one of the groups was, to disaggregate by gender. And so I was like, okay, you've got at least some non-binary metrics in there. I was like, but I know from doing work with some of my colleagues, another data point is collecting data for our LGBTQ plus students and making sure that those narratives are also captured in data. Also not just looking at student level data, but looking at, comparing representation of students and faculty and like racial demographics and other salient identities as well. And this other point too about introduction, right? Like examine the institution's vision of diversity, equity, inclusion, accessibility. Take some time to really like look at that, right? Like does the mission even center equity, right? Is this an opportunity to like, instead of moving forward and saying, yes, we're doing all these things, maybe we need to pause and actually come back as a working group on our campus, to think about, maybe we need to rewrite our mission. Maybe we need to have more, better goals that are better aligned with equity. Another, I know, area of the framework was to assess climate. And so I know that there was a note about, campus climate surveys. But I would also, encourage you to be mindful about the surveys that are being used, right? Like, are these surveys being used from an institutional accountability lens, where instead of asking, how often are students visiting professors during office hours, are we asking, how welcome do students feel to, visit their professors during office hours, right? So making sure that, yes, even if we have surveys, that we're framing these questions and these items on the surveys from an anti-deficit perspective. And then also, of course, I know that there's not a lot of resources, and I know capacity is a challenge, but, taking some time to capture some of those qualitative, research, narratives as well, these counter narratives that could also be important in informing the activities that are in place. And then lastly, right, this idea of like policy, strategies, services, and practices. I think what we tell folks is that, if equity, from a very like being like not race neutral lens and language is not included in your policies, and it's not going to become a priority. And so making sure that we're really thinking critically and examining critically what our policies and strategies look like at our, at our institutions. And I guess I'll say like as a final comment, I know I'm over time, but I'll say that the one thing that I think our colleges struggled with in our own equity planning work is that it felt very rushed, right? And I think we were in California, we were given very short timelines to be able to produce these frameworks and everything all at once. And so I'm hoping that there is kind of like scaffolding work that will occur in Illinois with this student equity planning work. But I would say, you know, if you're part of these teams at your campus, take some time to just encourage people to pause and reflect. So that is all I got. I think that's my last slide. Yeah. Oh, I'll end with this last quote from Dr. Sullivan Simon, which is equity and equity mindedness itself, right? Accept that it's whiteness, not the achievement gap that produces and sustains racial inequality in higher education. That the authentic exercise of equity and equity mindedness requires explicit attention to structural inequality and institutionalized racism and demands system changing responses. That is all I got. I apologize for taking much time.
No, do not apologize. Thank you. That was
It was a lot. I'm sorry.
You've given us a lot of food for thought. It's so timely. Yes, there's clapping in the comments. Thank you. Seriously, we are embarking on all of these things and more that you all have tried, right? And now have some space to reflect on. And so that is, it's so timely. I'm so glad that the team had thought about, you know, what can we learn from you all? And you were a perfect opening for this. So thank you very much.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me.
So we're going to do a bit of an audible because why not? We know that this is a hard time to get people and just engaged in a conversation. The summer is always so hard. So we've asked the different breakout speakers if they might instead present in this space for 15 minutes each. And we are going to start it off with Ayinde, who is Illo, is a senior graduate assistant from OCCRL and has fans. Saw that. So, well, you know, and I should just say, with each of the breakout sessions, we wanted to help complement what Marissa and California are doing. And so we asked them to maybe present on not just on their work, but how it might work with some of the things that we've either learned from this session or things that they've known from California. And so with that, I'm going to throw it over to Ayinde to lead us in a 15-minute session.
All right, hey everybody, how y'all doing today? Okay, let me try to share this. Okay, so I'm going to need a little bit of participant interaction today with this audible. So with that being said, I have some slides to share. Can you all see this correctly?
Yes.
Okay,
Yes.
cool. I want to this thing is blocking my thing. Hold on. Okay, there we go. Blocking. Okay. So to begin, I have these slides, and just to give you all a quick rundown background about me. So yes, I am about to be my 5th year doctoral student here in at the College of Education in the equitable department. I study Black student experience at predominantly white institutions, and I utilize photo voice, which is a method combining photography and qualitative research to display my research. So the participation I need from you all. So I have these slides that I have to go a good 25, 30 minutes. However, I also have an activity at the end for us to participate in. So I'm going to go through this very quickly. And if you all have any questions or need me to slow down or anything like that, just let me know. And then we're going to do the quick activity right after, if you all would like to participate. Okay. So let's just get straight into it. Okay, so we have our mission statement. Okay, so just to break it down, I went to Indiana University, which is a PWI in the Midwest, and then now I'm at University of Illinois. And I realized after taking a course called the College Student at University of Illinois with Dr. Hood, that my own story of me being a Black student at the PWI was substantial for qualitative data. So at that point, I started analyzing my own experience at my PWI and my own identity development journey that I had gone through, because I had noticed in myself a significant amount of change just being in a space like this. So just for a little bit of background, there's been a lack of belonging for Black men at PWIs due to explicit and implicit variables. That could be lack of engagement in the classroom, explicit racism by campus police, otherization from peers. So those types of aspects all impacting matriculation and graduation rates of Black male students. And these are some examples of aspects that must be present on college campuses in order to have a positive learning environment. So after I analyzed my own story and my experience, I concurred with this fact that when I had these different options present for me, that I succeeded more academically as well as socially. So for my overarching question is just, how do the positive and negative aspects of college life influence the identity development of Black male students? And this image to the right is a photograph that I took in 2020 in June. It was a George Floyd protest in Bloomington, Indiana. So this is an example of using photography to bring your message to life. So in the past, we have different methods of capturing student voice. Often surveys, interviews, focus groups have been used as qualitative data. So I bring photo voice, which brings the interview aspect and then pairs it with an artistic aspect to bring it to a visual life. So I just want to check the time. Okay, and then also with photo voice, so for myself, I'm the researcher and I'm the photographer. So I'm taking my own pictures and I'm also writing the study. However, you can take this model to students and provide them with the camera and give them the format on how to conduct this study. So they would take notes on themselves and then take photos and use those photos in conjunction with their notes to display what they've been through. And these are different methods that photographers, photo voice practitioners have used throughout the years. This showed method is an example. You all can see this, and I'll share the slides after this, so I know I'm going fast. And then so the goals of photo voice is definitely to raise empathy and understanding for the subject. So essentially to give the viewer a first person view into the life of the storyteller, and to reach policymakers. 3 is of paramount importance because it's not just to be an artistic project to be appreciated, but it's to reach a policy-driven change. Okay, so for my own study, I also utilize autoethnography. So that's why I call it a photographic autoethnography. And autoethnography is essentially an ethnography on yourself. So like I said, when I was in college, I was taking daily notes on my phone, in my notebook, on Twitter, on Facebook, Snapchat, all these different methods of social media that I thought I was just enjoying. But as I look back on them to this day, it is very, empirical research that I was able to conduct and collect throughout my 4 years in Bloomington, Indiana. So after I did my autoethnography, going through my themes, I concluded these main themes across my studies: fear of isolation, fear of failure, and fear of being in a new space, and then comfort from different family members that I created and I made being on campus, from my fraternity, from the Black Culture Center, to supportive faculty members that I had. And then my last one was reflection, in which I realized that although I was going through things that were positive and negative at my campus, I realized that once I graduate, I had an effort and an opportunity, an obligation even to make sure that the next generation of students did not have to go through the same negative aspects that I went through, and also uplift the positive ones that I went through, so it could be a non-negotiable for all students. So just to give you all an example of my autoethnography, this was my fear section. So this is a self-portrait of me on the left and a field outside of my apartment on the right. So as I said, fear of isolation, fear of complacency, fear of not being good enough. And then also, so with photography, you can have it be explicit where you can see me looking distressed to the left, or on the picture to the right is more subjective in just a fine art manner in which you can see a barren field and you can feel the emptiness amongst that photo. And then so yeah, on the right you can see the different aspects that I went through, being called the N-word explicitly, and then just also different implicit factors as well. And then this was my comfort slide. So I have my fraternity brothers on the left, and then the Black Culture Center at the University of Illinois on the right, both spaces that embody to me a sense of belonging and a sense of family. And then reflection, I have a picture of my aunties and my baby cousin here on the left, who remind me that failure is not an option, that giving up is not an option. Anytime I get a phone call from them, it is a battery put right into my back to keep moving forward. And then the one on the right to also have that same fine art lens. I have an image of boats on Lake Michigan, showing the essentially just the perspective of balance and the perspective of reflection as water is a reflection. So just like I said, the ability to have it be explicit, but also objective, subjective for art. And then so these were the solutions that I came up with. And so at the Indiana University group, the Group Scholars Program is a summer bridge program that brings the majority of Black and Brown students to the university. And it is a program that I'm in love with. Definitely factored and changed many of myself and also my peers' relationship with the university and Black Culture Centers is in Holland. And then as Dr. Baber addressed earlier, addressing the lack of race-based initiatives, not just having an equity for all approach, but actually getting into specific communities that do need help. How am I doing that? Okay, so this right here would be an example of giving students the camera and letting them go for a semester, maybe for the full year, documenting their life, and then coming back to the researcher, myself, and I would take their photos, take their voices and viewpoints, interview them again, and then create a gallery walk for the community to come through and see the lives of the students. So as I said, these are just some very interesting just images that students were able to produce at a community college in 2018. So you can see technology, you can see a communal living space. So many people would think at this image in the middle, you would need to see students laughing and smiling, but even just the objectiveness of the actual meeting space there, you can imagine what that space looks like. It's just one of the parts that I do love about art. Okay, so family, do we have time to do this? Or should we just save it for next time? Put a thumbs up or a thumbs down.
You think it'll take 10 minutes?
Yeah, we could. Yes, yeah, we could do it in 10.
Yeah, let's do 10.
Okay,
Get
cool.
Maria following you, so that should work.
Okay, cool. All right, so if you all are comfortable with this, as I've shared a few of my images, I would like us to take really 5 minutes, and then we can share if anyone wants to share after. But just find an image from your time at your institution up until now that just describes your experience, or your work experience, excuse me, not collegiate experience, but maybe your work experience or just your experience at the institution you're at. And it could even be dealing with things that are outside of the school or just your family. Anything that you want to share that kind of just gives a first person view into your life so you all can practice this method of photo voice. And then you don't have to write a paragraph, you could just share like maybe a sentence or two on what that image means to you. And so we can just see an example of bringing photo voice into practice. Does that sound good with everybody? Okay, I have one so far. I'm already excited. Does anybody else want to send me any? And if you want to, you can actually send it in the chat. But if nobody else wants to share, it's completely fine. We have one participant. Okay, I'm about to pull it up now.
For it.
Okay, you all see? All right, thank you.
Yeah, I was like, oh, this is perfect because I shared, I literally came from doing a presentation with the transfer students here, and this slide was part of my presentation, so it was something quick I was able to pull up, thankfully. But I think this picture, I'm like, I was so young. This was me sitting in front of the UC Berkeley library, holding was it 2003 class schedule, looking for my classes. I look like I'm happy, but like I was scared, I was nervous. As I'd shared before, coming in as a transfer student from San Diego, right? I definitely experienced that transfer and culture shock, right? Being no longer the majority of, representation, but, that 9% of, my just being Latina. So I had a lot of feelings of like isolation, loneliness, a lot of insecurities, a lot of these thoughts that, I wasn't smart enough. I felt very intimidated in my spaces. And then, I just kind of lacked, I was a very naive person, I think, as a teenager, right? Like I knew college was important, but I didn't know what questions to ask, right? Like I didn't have that navigational social capital, even as a transfer student. And I think it was like basically learning how to be a student all over again, at a whole new campus, right? Learning how to navigate, like even just like the geographic region. So yeah, so thank you for letting me share this, but yeah.
Oh, yeah, thank you for sharing. Excuse me. And yeah, this is exactly why I love this practice. It just literally gives you a first person view. Um, we have two other ones. Do we have time, family, or should we stop?
I'll jump in and just quickly say, we'll end at 1:35. I'll say that mine, I just was in DC for a teaching excellence convening and went to a speakeasy at the hotel that we were staying at. And it was themed Ruby Bridges meets Alice in Wonderland. And I was like, oh, whoever themed this, like this, it feels like me. So yeah, when I saw that just the picture,
Oh, yeah.
all the drinks were themed around Ruby Bridges and telling the story. Yeah, it
That's
captured
crazy.
me well.
Yeah, that's crazy. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah, that's amazing.
It is.
Where were you at again? Where did you say you were?
It was the Eaton Hotel in DC.
Oh, okay, cool.
The speakeasy was called Allegory. So
That's what's up. Okay, we got one more. Dr. Baber wants to speak on his.
Yeah, I just found, pictures I had on this computer, but this is a graduation, maybe 2019, maybe. And just real quick, just reflects, my vision of what we do in education is disseminate knowledge, break down the kind of systematic barriers especially for minoritized populations, women, people of color, and just elevate the practice through producing, equity-minded scholar practitioners. So that's just one example of a group we had at Iowa State, and some of you recognize Dr. Wilson, who was our guest speaker in the spring, as well as Dr. Doran, who's a preeminent scholar in our field and just moving to Texas, El Paso from Iowa State. So, yeah, thanks for letting me share.
Oh yeah, thank you for sharing. So yeah, I know this was kind of abbreviated session, y'all, but I just hope you all can see the impact, the potential impact of photo voice. And yeah, if y'all have any questions or want to bring photography to your research, you please hit me up. And yeah, I look forward to working with y'all in the future. Thank you.
thank you. I love every time you do this. And we made you go from an hour to 15. You're gonna be ready for this dissertation defense in no time. So
Good practice, good practice.
thank you so much, Ayinde.
Appreciate it.
Next up is Maria. And Maria is a colleague out of at Bakersfield, and also works with us through this, we have an NSF Aspire Alliance project, and she's going to share a little bit about some of the work that they're doing in regards to faculty diversification. So your turn, Maria. Thank you.
Thank you so much. So I'm gonna go ahead and I think you guys can see my screen now. Hold on, because I'm getting pop-ups on here, so I can't see my screen.
Yes, we can though.
Okay, good. Good. I'm gonna try and keep my presentation brief because I'm working from home today, so I have 2 young kids and their patience is a little low. But I will also share, my slides, so that any of you who want access to them can have them. So my name again, Maria Wright, and I work at Bakersfield College in the Department of Education. And I oversee the Faculty Diversification Fellowship Program at Bakersfield College, which is located in the Central Valley. So I'm just going to walk you through a little bit of how our program functions and how it started, how it's going, and then some best practices that we've learned. So this is our why. So when we started looking at data for our demographics, when we look at faculty, based on identifiers like race and ethnicity, and students, we already knew that we were a Hispanic serving institution and that our faculty did not represent our student body. But as we started to dig a little deeper, we realized that the gap was even wider than anecdotally we probably perceived. And so here is some data from fall of 2023, because this is the most recent data we have because it is retroactive data. And so it is reported over to the state, and then the chancellor's office at the state level will then provide this information to the colleges. So as you can see, most of our students are Hispanics, identify as Hispanic. We are a Hispanic serving institution, yet most of our faculty are white non-Hispanic, both our adjunct, which is our part-time faculty, and our full-time faculty. And so this is our driving force. We need to have faculty that represent our student body. And obviously there's a lot of literature and data out there that support the matching of these two to enhance student success. And Marissa talked a little bit about that. So thank you, Marissa, for setting the floor for this presentation. And then to tell you a little bit about where we are geographically located. So we're in the Central Valley of California, and that includes 8 counties, and it's 400 miles. And there is so many higher ed institutions throughout this region. So we have 116 community colleges in the state, 23 CSUs, and I think we're up to 11 UCs, or is it 9 UCs? I always get my numbers wrong, but I do know that there's 116 community colleges, which is the branch I belong to. And over this stretch of land, there is rich agricultural fields, and over 25% of the nation's food is produced by our region. Yet we have one of the highest job insecurities and one of the highest educational attainment. And so the resources exist here and are available here, yet our folks are not being able to take advantage of what exists here to promote social mobility within their own households. And so we really looked at opportunities to continue to engage with what we have rather than recreating or providing a new framework, but using the resources that exist to grow our own. That's become a common term now, grow your own faculty or grow your own teachers. How do we cultivate the students that are already in the system to ensure that they have the ability to, number one, advance in their academic aspirations, but also to contribute to their career aspirations by providing them with opportunities to teach at a community college. So for us, we started in the fall of 2020 with some funding that we received from the Aspire Alliance. And our goal here was to provide opportunities to graduate students or post-baccalaureate students who were seeking or had recently obtained a graduate degree in a STEM discipline and were interested in teaching at a community college. So we partnered those folks with a faculty in their discipline to provide some mentorship, and also provided them the opportunity to be in the classroom and to have their own load as an instructor of record, which I'll get to in just a moment. But this was the background of how we started and how we established our program. And I know I'm going through it fairly quickly, so if there are any questions, feel free to just jump in. I can't see the chat from where I'm at right now, but feel free to just jump in and unmute yourself, or I will also provide my email if you want to send me an email. So as of today, here are some of our active institutional partners. We have applicants that come from other institutions, but these are our big feeders. So with our program, we again recruit graduate students, and our students come from CSUB, which is our local CSU, or our graduate the institution that provides graduate degrees. UC Merced is our co-PI for the grant. We have folks from Santa Cruz, Santa Barbara, and then UCLA and Fresno State. And we're constantly looking to advance the number of institutional partners. And so when we started, here were the STEM disciplines that we targeted when looking for people to come and be part of the program. And the way that we did this is or the way we landed on this is we did a needs assessment. And when we looked at opportunities available to our students here locally, we have one CSU, and that's CSU Bakersfield, and they only offered a master's degree in biology. And so for any other STEM discipline, when we're recruiting for faculty, we'd have to recruit from external areas to fill those positions. So we started, to partner with UC Merced, which is within the region, but it's further away, to bring some folks that were interested. And as a result, we were able to also include Fresno State, which is about halfway between Merced and Bakersfield. And then this is a brief program description. So I have a model, which is a visual representation. So I'm going to skip this and just go to the model. And the way that we designed it, it's two faces with the launching pad. And so that launching pad is what we identify as our flex or professional development. We invite fellows to participate, the selected fellows to participate in our institutional professional development days and take part of some of our like what we call our opening days, where the president delivers a speech, and we have some key people from the institution, from different bodies like the faculty body, the student body, our classified or support staff, that provide updates and set the vision for the coming year. And I apologize for my cough. I had COVID not too long ago, and so I have that lingering cough that seems to never go away. And then after, we also have our program orientation in that week. And then in the fall term, they enroll in a course that is entitled Teaching at the California Community College. And they are tasked with developing a course in their discipline, and that helps them to navigate our governing bodies, to go through the curricular process, to identify establishing a course outline of record, those things that are very important and deeply embedded into the everyday life of faculty that may not be taught in their graduate program, right? So those very real hands-on tools that they need to be successful. And then in the spring semester, they have some what we call our supervised teaching, where they are the instructor of record, but they continue to receive support from their mentor, and they're able to teach a class with feedback and support from their mentor, potentially the department chair, just to give them an idea of what it's like to be in the classroom as the faculty member, but also receiving that support so they don't have to do it all on their own. And that's kind of the model that we have set up there. And we have to navigate different things. For example, in California, we have Title V, which is what regulates our educational policies at the institutional level. And we were able to find some key things here in Title V, which allows us to navigate minimum qualifications if we have a faculty intern, which is what we have. And because we recruit faculty that haven't yet completed their master's, or we recruit fellows who haven't completed their master's program, if they're within the last year, this legislation specifically allows us to have them in the classroom as instructors of record if they're working on finishing up their program. And then just a bit of information on our fellows and where they stand today. So when we started in the fall of 2020, we had a small group of folks, and as you can see, they're all in an adjunct position, in a tenure track or adjunct position at a community college. And so we were really happy to see their progress. We continue to track where they stand. So that was our first cohort. Our second cohort, as you can see, many of them received some tenure track positions with us at our community college, some with our local CSU, and then some received some adjunct positions, and then some folks were not pictured here, but we also have folks that work, for example, at a middle school and in private industry. And so we, again, like to track just to see how our fellows are doing post completion of the fellowship. And in fall of 2022, we got additional funding, so we increased our number of folks and the departments or disciplines that we served. And as you can see, all of them were able to secure a job at Bakersfield College and or in private industry, which was a big win for us because we were able to fill a lot of those vacancies that we had, and also bring on folks that had specialized expertise in these disciplines. And then in the fall of 23, we shrinked it back because we did some remodeling of our program. But as you can see, all of them were able to, again, get a tenure track or adjunct position or work at a community college. And this is our cohort 5. They just finished in the spring, so I don't have an update yet, but I definitely wanted to show a picture. And then we talked a little bit about the DEI, anti-DEI legislation. I definitely encourage you guys to utilize this link. This tells you where the how it's impacted each state. So as you can see, there's some that don't have a bill, some that have bills that were introduced, if it was signed into law or tabled or failed to pass. And so if you navigate this link here, it'll give you some live updates on where we stand today. So just wanted to put that in there since it fits the theme of our discussion. And then just some recommendations for broadening participation efforts. Obviously, we have to filter down the state mandates and requirements. And then we have our institutional mandates and requirements, district local mandates, and then funding. So looking at those requirements or mandates can sometimes become very restrictive. So looking and navigating, like we found even in Title V, that little verbiage on faculty interns and how they would qualify for teaching opportunities. I think just continue to navigate what exists and find the winning pieces that will keep your work moving forward. So that's something that I think was really valuable to us, to have multiple people looking and mining these documents to identify opportunities for growth. And then some other things, find your why. Why are you implementing something that enhances diversity? Like why is this even important? Once you have your why, I think it helps to drive the movement. And it becomes an important piece of work rather than just another initiative. And secondly, identify and address potential barriers head on. So as you're planning, what could be some potential barriers? So for us, we're in Central California where we don't have any active anti-DEI policy, but in the Central Valley, it's like the red belt of California. So we have some very conservative folks and that drives the campus culture and potentially some policy at the institutional level. And so having to identify those challenges head on and plan potential solutions around it was important to a successful implementation. Third, recognize and support your champions, those faculty champions and administrative champions that are going to move your work forward. Make them your best friend, work with them, support them, give them additional resources to keep the work going, because you can't be the only one carrying the load. You need the faculty, the champions that are going to carry the work with you. And then we implemented a collective impact approach where we had multiple stakeholders who were deeply embedded in the work. So again, we divided the work up, and it wasn't a heavy workload, but also to have various perspectives on how to implement, how to modify. And that's why you've seen a change in the number of fellows we admit and bring into the program. And then lastly, shape your legacy. This is an opportunity where it's so tumultuous around DEI, right? We have legislation, we have, even with the current presidential candidates, there's so much just, this is not a very good word, but a lot of craziness around what's happening in our nation today. So use this as an opportunity to shape your legacy and really circling back to your why. Why is it that this work is important? And, you know, I can testify that as someone who's in this work every day, it's sometimes easy to just say, I think I'm done. Someone else can do this. But continuing to do that work and recognizing the little wins along the way to your big win is, for me, part of shaping my legacy for those that are coming after us. And then just some links that you may find helpful from our institution, from our program, if you are willing to visit them or want more information. And then I've embedded my email. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. And that's all I have.
Great, thank you so much. At this time, we're going to conclude our time together. So I want to give a huge thank you to Dr. Marissa Vasquez, as well as Dr. Maria Wright, as well as future Dr. Ayinde Rochon, as we presented, as well as our OCCRL staff members, Dr. Baber and Dr. Baker. For joining, and for all of you for joining us today. This session is being recorded, so just a few housekeeping things. The session has been recorded, so we will make it available to all of those that registered, as well as those that participated. And we just want to thank you for spending some time with us as we look at the ways in which we can talk about the SCOTUS decision and its implications and its and what it means to do the work in our community college settings, and from the lessons learned from the passing of Proposition 209, and some lessons learned from California and how we can be innovative in the work that we're doing. Just want to thank you all for joining us today, and we will be sending out a survey to get some feedback from those attending, so we can always be working on continuous improvement. So thank you all for joining us today.